will willingness to start with or to share some information with us, and we'll not waste any more time and turn it over to you. Thank you, Patricia.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to see people from all over the country, it looks like, who are here in the TACDA presentation tonight. I do want to give you just a little bit of background about me, and I hope you'll find it interesting. I was asked to do that. So first of all, you mentioned, Jay, that the book was first printed in 2002. Actually, in 1984, the first copyright was printed. My husband graduated from college with an MBA, had a perfectly good job, and we were in the early 80s trying to figure out what in the heck was going on in the world. He was certain that there were going to be bad times ahead, so he like I said, quit a perfectly good job and decided to write this book. And he was going to write it in 6 months. Well, it took about 3 years. And during that time, we used all of our savings and we lived the preparedness life, that is for sure, because we really had to make ends meet. But he got the book done, and a couple of people helped him actually do it. He did it on a shoestring, total shoestring. He printed 500 copies. He advertised the book in a couple of preparedness magazines. I can't remember the names for sure, but I want to say Survival Times, something like that. And anyway, then he went back to getting a regular job because he wasn't going to make enough money to support us that way. And we had at the time 4 children, and we eventually had 6 children. So we had a pretty big family. And I wouldn't say that I was as passionate as he was, but I was definitely living the survival preparedness. I don't think we called it those things back then. We called it, probably preparedness was a good word for it. But when Jack was the original author, and when he decided the title of the book, he called it Crisis Preparedness, because he didn't want to call it emergency preparedness. That's too defined, and crisis is a little broader. And I think it leaves it open to all kinds of things that happen to us in our lives. So anyway, just to go on with the story, we went ahead and lived our lives pretty much, and well, we did. And in 2002, right after 9/11, Jack saw an opportunity to revise the book. So he did that in 2002, revised the book. And because we now had something called Amazon, he could self-publish the book and sell it on Amazon. And people who searched on Amazon could find things that had to do with preparedness or with survival, and they found the book. Unfortunately, in 2005, Jack passed away very suddenly. And I was teaching school. Most of our kids were out of the house. We had one daughter still in high school. And I was really just hit with a whole total change in my life. The book had started actually really selling well on Amazon about in May when he died, and maybe June and July, there was a bombing in London, and I saw an uptick in the number of books that were bought. And then Hurricane Katrina happened. And when Hurricane Katrina happened, the book just really took off. And then, of course, we had 2008 and the big downturn and all those kinds of things. And there weren't a lot of preparedness books. Jay, you mentioned that you had a lot of preparedness books. Back then, there weren't that many, but then there soon came to be. And I just continued teaching school and getting the books printed. At that time, they didn't have print on demand at Amazon. We just printed the books. I'd have to estimate how many I was going to sell, and I continued to sell them. In 2010, I remarried, and I kind of ended my teaching career a couple of years after that. And I felt like there was a need to revise the book. Jack really never had any kind of professional editing or anything like that. So he figured if he had a college degree, he could write well enough. And in some ways he was right. There was a few things that we found later that we probably should have changed. But anyway, I decided I had some time. So I thought, oh, I'll take some time and just update it and revise it a little bit. Well, that updating and revising took about 4 years. Now, I won't say I did it 40 hours a week, but I spent a lot of time researching and revising. My background, like I said, I was a teacher. And so I have I like learning. I like doing things that are, in the research area, which not all people do. So I did. I rewrote the book, and then I got and I say rewrote it, I followed Jack's outline, but there were so many things that needed to be updated that had changed. And so I put his name on the title, on the cover, because I felt like, in all honesty, it was my book now, but he had been the original contributor to it. So that's why, and of course, I'm the one that is promoting it. And if you happen to look at the book, if you happen to have the book, there's a story all about how we lived our lives, and there's just a one-page story about it. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about me. And I'm going to try to figure out how to get rid of some of this stuff on my screen so I can look at my screen. Okay. So I've got the screen ready now, and that's a picture of me I think it was last fall, maybe, in my favorite place at Jenny Lake Lodge in the Tetons. My husband now is Craig Aston. And someone needs to mute. I'm sorry. I will, if you have comments or questions, I will give you some time in a little bit. That's okay. Okay, so anyway, that's the first picture I wanted to show you. And then the next thing, let's see, hoping this is going to work. Yeah. So just a little bit about so let me go back. So this is the day that the books arrived when I had them printed. The copyright now is 2020. So almost 18 years later. And that's the first day. So it was kind of fun to celebrate. The books are available from me on my website, but they're also available with print on demand on Amazon, and they're in Barnes and Noble and other places. In fact, TACDA also sells the book. So if any of you are interested in a copy of it after tonight, you're welcome to do that. And we have a little promotion we'll tell you about at the end. So this is kind of giving you an idea of the contents of it. There's the first section is all about the whole vision of why we need to prepare and what things we might need to prepare for. There's a section on water, quite extensive, about storing water, purifying and water filtration. There's a big chunk of a chapter on food. Food, of course, is really important in preparedness. And then my husband now, Craig Aston is his name. He graduated, he graduated from Utah State University, but he also taught there for 30 years in horticulture. He was a farm boy from Idaho. So we are both very much involved in our gardening, and we even have had chickens. We don't have them right now, but so that's the growing and preserving food. That's a big
The camera's showing me.
Okay, I think you guys need to be muted. There's some people, I don't know.
Where are you, Patricia?
Jay, you need to ask Patricia to unmute.
I pressed the button there.
Am I muted?
There we go. There we go.
Have I been talking all this time and no one's heard me?
No, I just barely muted when we had that second
Okay.
interference. I muted everyone and I was just unmuting you.
Okay. So anyway, the section on growing and preserving food is a big section. And then preparing your shelter for a crisis. And that includes all aspects of your home security, even clothing and bedding, heating, cooking, lighting, refrigeration, all those important things that you have to be thinking about in some kind of a crisis usually. Okay, why are we moving forward? There. And then the last section is on kind of a catch-all in a way, communication, transportation, and protection for a crisis. And I have a section in there that it's probably, especially TACDA, interesting because it's a chapter on surviving terrorism and war. And I think that's a really important thing. And right now it's pretty current in the news. Okay, so now I want to tell you a little story. So I told you that my husband is involved with horticulture. He actually also owns a landscaping company. And Glenn Beck he has a place in Idaho that he's been kind of a homestead, and Craig's company has been doing the landscaping for it. So we got a little bit connected with him, and we sent him a copy of the book because we know that a lot of his audience might be interested in being prepared. So he was so nice. He actually mentioned the book on May 5th, 2021. And he said, I want you to get this book right now. Crisis Preparedness Handbook. Get this book. This book, the best preparedness book I've ever read because it doesn't overwhelm you. Now, I think he might be a little prone to hyperbole, but it was kind of fun to see what he said. This book is so good because it breaks it down. And that is true. It breaks it down into simple things. The whole book takes the attitude, if you don't do that, no big deal, do this, do that. And it's true. I give a lot of options in the book. And then he said, this really is the best book. And this is the most interesting thing to me. And it was really gratifying because I put a lot of time and effort and actually financial resources into getting the book printed. I went to #1 on Amazon from his endorsement, and it shut down my website for a couple of hours. And anyway, it was kind of exciting. But I really appreciated it. And then we went out and visited him. And that's my husband on the left. And then, of course, Glenn in the middle and me. So that was kind of a fun thing. But I felt not only did he mention it, but people all over the country purchased it from me on my website. And there were a lot more purchases on Amazon. So I felt like this is actually a topic that's really important to a lot of people all over the country. So that was really interesting to see the results of that. But anyway, I just share that with you. So I can say I'm an Amazon #1 bestseller for one day. I think it was #2 for a few days too. Okay, then I have 6 children. 3 of them are girls. And as I'm writing the book, 2 of my sons actually really helped a lot with the editing. And one of my sons, I have a daughter in Baltimore and a son in Virginia and a daughter in North Carolina. And I have 3 children that live in the same state where I live, which is Utah. So I have got kids all over the country. And I said, what do you guys think? What do you think of the book? And all 3 of my daughters separately said, Mom, just make it simple for us. Tell us exactly what to do. Well, that was really disheartening because I had this great book. All I have to do is open the book and read it, and they would know what to do. But they wanted it simpler than that. So I decided that there are probably a lot of other people just like my daughters who wanted something easy. So I decided, beginning of 2022, I decided to start a crisis. I call it a preparedness challenge. And so every week I put a preparedness challenge on my website. And a lot of times I put it on my Facebook pages. Facebook is kind of difficult to work with. They try to say you're spamming, and anyway, it's annoying, but it's always on my website. So we finished up at the end of this year. And if any of you are like my daughters and want something easy, then just go to this website, and it's crisispreparedness.com. Pretty easy to remember. And right up in the top of the homepage is a place that has the blog. And so that part right there is where you'll find all 52 articles that were presented this year. And I have some people that have asked me if they can present them to organizations that they belong to and give people the challenge. And I'm fine with that. If any of you'd like to do that, let me know. I'd like to know if you're doing it. And also, I would appreciate it if you'd said that I was the author of them, just for that reason. It actually takes me a full day every time to get it, well, more than a full day, but to write it, get all the illustrations, everything ready. So that is something that is a resource for you. It's really free. If you want, I'm kind of taking a break for January. I have been thinking about how I want to proceed next year, because if I've already given everyone a year's worth of preparedness challenges, I'm pretty sure a lot of people didn't do every single challenge. But anyway, I'm trying to rethink how I want to do that. So I will start again in February. But if you want to get that information, you can sign up for the email. And I send out an email, really short. You don't have to read a lot. And then I always have a connection to the blog post. And you can decide if it's a blog post you want to turn on or not. So anyway, I thought I'd share that. So I have the book, but I also have this. And then now I'm going to start the presentation. And I'm going to go pretty fast. I've thought a lot, especially because my daughters have asked, and I've thought, okay, so what is it people really need to be prepared? Now, I am assuming that there are all kinds of people who belong to TACDA. I'm sure there's people who know a ton more than I know. And I'm sure there's people that are just getting started. So I apologize if everything I say is not new. If it's something you already know. But I do think sometimes, as I explain it, there might be a little twist that might be helpful to you veterans. But also those of you that are getting started, this is just a beginning. So this is called First Steps to Being Prepared. And by the way, I will give you some time for asking questions or making comments, because some of you probably have some good ideas you want to share, and that'd be great. And I love this picture because really, what are we planning for? Now, that's supposed to be an asteroid hitting Earth. And that does seem like a real cataclysmic event. There's actually a book called Lucifer's Hammer that tells, it's a fiction book, and it tells all about the aftermath of a giant asteroid hitting Earth. If any of you want to read that, it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit older book, but it's fun. Okay, so what crises might come your way? And this is just a super, I tried to make it as intensive as I could, a list of all the things that might happen. Which crises are most likely to happen? Which ones might you face? Okay, so here's a way to look at it. You can think about any particular crisis. How likely is it to happen? And if it happens, how severe will it be? So that's kind of a continuum. So right here, how likely is the crisis? Is it to happen frequently? Like we have hurricanes every year, so that's a frequent occurrence. It might not be frequent for me where I'm living in Utah, but my daughter in North Carolina, my son in Virginia, my other daughter in Maryland, they always get the aftermath of some kind of hurricane every year. So it depends on where you live. But you'd have, and so each person has to decide that. Is it, and then there's, is it likely to occur several times, like earthquakes? California gets earthquakes frequently, and other parts of the country do, and other parts of the world definitely do. So how probable is it? Is it probable? Is it occasional? Is it remote? Is it improbable? I mean, we always hear about Yellowstone erupting, and I can't remember what they call that, but that would be improbable, very unlikely, but could happen. And if it did, it would be very catastrophic. So anyway, that's that side of it. And up here, how severe is the crisis? Is it just going to be a temporary inconvenience? Is there some disruption, marginal disruption? And you don't always know, but you can kind of make a guess for it. And so here's a few of them that I've put in just to show you. We had this pandemic, this great pandemic that we all suffered through. And it was a major disruption, not necessarily the pandemic, but what happened in the aftermath with all the various, interferences or whatever you might want to call it. The pandemic became fairly critical, but it is occasional. The last time there was one was over 100 years ago. I'm not so sure that I would guarantee that there wouldn't be more frequent pandemics. However, I wouldn't say that 100 years is the rule. Our world is it's a lot smaller in a way, so maybe pandemics would be more often. Wildfires. Now that depends on where you live. If you're in California or the Northwest, even in Utah, it might not be a remote possibility. It might be more like a probable possibility in some areas. So you get the idea. Now, here's a meme I just thought was really right. You mean to tell me my chance of surviving all of this is directly related to the common sense of others? And I think sometimes we're in that situation where we have to rely on others, and maybe that's not so good, so we need to rely on ourselves. But I love that picture. Okay, how prepared are you? Here is a top 10 preparedness check. And I'm not going to go through it all just to save time, but it is available for you, and I'll show you where that is in just a minute. But some of these areas, if you're kind of just checking it over, you might need to get started. You might have some work to do, and maybe you've got it nailed. My husband, as I was kind of showing him the slides in the presentation, he says, yeah, I see we have some work to do. So all of us probably have some work to do. Okay, so here is another place where you can find it. These last little charts that I've shown you come from something called the Free Quick Start Guide, which is on my website. And it's about a, 15-page kind of a little pamphlet that is a quick start, just like it said. And so those of you that are just starting, you're free to just go ahead and download that and check out some of the ideas that I have about getting started. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about natural disasters. We all have them, some kind or another. Any of these could be in any number of places in our world, in our country. So natural disasters are a common thing, a common thread for all of us to need to be prepared for. And here, I think this is an interesting chart. This is actually from the book. What are the odds of a natural disaster near you? Now, if you look here, you can find your state here on the second column, and it will tell you what FEMA region you're in. And these are disasters from 1964 to 2013, so about 40 years. It's probably similar now, although I do think one area, fire, seems to be more prevalent lately. So maybe that would be more severe, especially in California, Oregon, and Washington, maybe some other parts of our country. But you can kind of look and find your state and see what's most likely. It's interesting that severe storms are common in every state. And we all have severe storms, and they may be cold storms, they may be warm storms, they may be lots of water, they may even be wind storms. And then on the right-hand side, you can see other kinds of disasters that are less frequent. So you can see we do need to prepare for these kinds of things. Okay, then another area, and this, I don't know if we think about this that much, but this is personal loss. If you are prepared for lots of things, you will also be prepared for personal loss. So if you're prepared for natural disasters, in some ways you'll be prepared for financial loss. When my husband died in 2005, that was a huge challenge. I was okay temporally, but the emotional part of it was really a challenge. So I think it's important for us to think about how well prepared are we for personal challenges that might come up. And I do say all of us will have them. So it's something just to think about. And this is a great one, man-caused crisis, just what we need. And I think we've seen those in the last 3 or 4 years more than ever. The picture on the left is actually my grocery store. I took a picture of this. This was my grocery store sometime during the pandemic. And that's the pasta section, and all. There was nothing. There were other things in the store, but that's what grocery stores can look like. My daughter that lives in Baltimore, she says that when there's a hurricane coming or some kind of a big storm, the things to go are bananas and orange juice. And she doesn't know why, and people even joke about it. But the stores get empty just like that. So if we're prepared and have our own supply, we won't be suffering, and our family won't be suffering. We can help others too. And then this poor guy in the front, I mean, that just says it all. Sometimes the financial things just happen. And then, of course, civil unrest. Civil unrest almost seems to be a pandemic itself, because it gets started in one city and then it goes to the next city and the next city. I mean, even little towns have their version of the civil unrest. We live, and this is, Jack really believed this strongly, and it's in the book. I kept that part in because it's really true. We are so interconnected in our world that just think about the trucks. If there's an interruption in service from the trucks that travel across this country, bringing goods and services, well, goods anyway, just think about how disruptive that can be. And if it lasts for a while or a long time, even more disruptive. Social unrest, we talked about a little bit. And then economic upheaval. I was going to put the slide in and I didn't have time, but I saw a meme today that showed people fighting over a television set on Black Friday. And it said, if people are this angry and fighting over a television set, what are they going to do if they don't have food? I think economic upheaval, that's an interesting thing to think about, and something to think about how you're going to handle that. And then the last one I put in was war and nuclear threat. And I know this is not a real picture, but I thought it could be a real picture in certain scenarios. I mean, we do have that, and we've seen that in the last year with the Ukraine incident. Ongoing war, I should say. So those are things that are man-made, and there may be even more man-made things that we haven't thought of and that I haven't listed here. Okay, so I think this was a good chance for maybe a little break. Does anyone have any comments they want to make about the things we need to be prepared for, or thoughts they've had as I've been showing things? I guess you have to unmute them, Jay, if there's anyone that wants to talk. And it's okay if you don't, we're fine. So I can't hear you, Jay, so.
I think we're good.
Okay, all right, so let's go on then. And the
Yep.
puzzling question is, where do you begin? I think the tendency a lot of people have is to begin with food. And I don't disagree with that, but I thought maybe tonight I would start with other areas that I think are sometimes overlooked. So the first one is start with water. And I think we all probably know that we need to have water. Just a couple of little tidbits about it. According to FEMA and the Center for Disease Control, I think CDC, we should have enough water for 3 days. That's to begin with. And that would be a gallon a day per person. Well, just doing the math, a case of half-liter bottles is a little over 3 gallons. So if you have 5 in your family and you have 5 cases, you'll have enough for 3 days. The trick is you probably are going to want to use it because it doesn't last for a long time. The bottles aren't the best for long-term storage. So you have to keep replenishing it. Another way to store water is with larger containers. This is a nice container, holds 7 gallons. A family of 4 needs 8 of these to have enough water for 2 weeks. And that's the next recommendation is once you have enough for 3 days, then try to get enough water for 2 weeks. These are stackable water bricks, and probably some of you have seen them. I like them. I haven't got any, but I do like the idea because they stack together and they are really compact for water and you can just grab them and go. They are a little bit pricey, but they hold about 3.5 gallons, which is about 30 pounds. And then the big water containers, these are not portable, of course. And this is one brand I think this is a really nice brand, this water prepared 55-gallon barrel. It has a spigot on the bottom. Some of them have spigots in the middle. Some of them don't have spigots at all, and you need a spigot or a pump to use these big 55-gallon water barrels. This one's especially nice because it's stackable. You can see the little grooves in the top and it stacks. Okay, then the next thing about water is purifying it. And good old boiling is probably the best way to purify water if you have the fuel and if you have the water that you can, well, you have to have water to boil it, obviously. But so having a good container and fuel, if you boil it for 1 minute, sometimes people say you have to boil it 10 minutes, not so. It only really has to get up to the high enough temperature to kill the microorganisms. And actually you don't have to boil it. You can get it to about 160 degrees. So if you're really short on fuel, it doesn't have to come to a full rapid boil. It just has to be hot enough to kill the microorganisms. 8 drops of bleach per gallon of water. That's another thing to have. Of course, you probably know that bleach has a short shelf life, so you have to replace it every year. This is a nice product. If you haven't seen this before, the Aquamira Part A and Part B, this is actually chlorine dioxide. That 55-gallon container I showed you, if you fill it with tap water, you probably don't need to do any other kind of purification. But if you want to be on the safe side, these 2 containers will purify 55 gallons. And of course, it will purify smaller amounts too. This is SOTUS is a nice way to, this might come in handy if you just having this knowledge. If you have clear water and clear containers, the sun's UV rays will take care of bacteria and other microorganisms in 6 hours. Now, the trick is to have it slanted correctly toward the sun. And I have more details about this in my book too, but this is actually used in Africa where they have the water bottles, but they don't have the clean water. They use SOTUS fairly frequently to purify their water. These are a couple of 3 different kind of cool things that I think are nice. I think they'd be really nice for traveling as well as emergency preparedness. The one on the left is SteriPen, and it emits UV rays, so you can use it to stir clear water. The thing about murky water is the microorganisms tend to hide behind the particles so that UV doesn't work as well. I guess if you shake it around and use it, you could probably get most of the bacteria, but kind of want to get it all. This bottle in the middle, my grandson introduced me to. It's the cool thing. It is a water bottle that has a UV filter in the top, and it has 2 different settings. One that you can just put on to keep your water bottle from getting all gunky, And the other one is to actually purify water, and it takes about, I think he said 10 minutes to purify the water. And then the last one is an ozone O-Pen by Roving Blue. It emits ozone, which is really used in a lot of places to purify water. And this is a nice one if you were, for traveling, you can just put it in the water and use the ozone to clean it. So those are a couple of things you might, if you're looking for some kind of cool gadget that is useful, that these are helpful. Then the next thing I'm going to talk about is water filtration. And I don't want you to think that I think that you can use that streams filter water. I'm not trying to say that, but I just thought it was really made me want to have nice, clear water to drink. So the next thing I want to show you is my recommendation is to have personal water filters for everyone. And Aquamira, the one in the middle, they've kind of changed their filters recently. They've updated them, but that's a good company and they're not too expensive. They're only like around $40. The Life Straw and the Sawyer Squeeze, they're just examples. There's other personal water filters, but I recommend that you have one for everyone that's capable of knowing how to keep them from getting contaminated. This is a group filter that is, it's a nice filter. It runs about $120, but it is not the kind you take backpacking. Obviously, it's a big one, but it does filter 24 gallons of water a day, which could be really useful in some some crises and some emergencies. These are a couple of backpacking group filters. The MSR Guardian, I really am in favor of that one because it gets everyone. A few years ago, my husband and I bought them for all of well, we bought them for our sons. We probably should have bought them for our daughters too, but we bought them because our sons like to backpack. And we thought that would be nice. And they are good for emergencies as well. Okay, so we've talked about water. Now I want to talk about sanitation. Sometimes we don't think about sanitation, but it's really important. I think I say something in my book about sanitation, that sanitation, the aftermath of some kind of a natural disaster, the sanitation problems can actually be worse than the actual disaster. So it's important to take care of sanitation. And here's just a couple of, there's lots more that I could say, but I just want to give you kind of a getting started way. One thing is just to use, if your toilets don't work in your house, you can use your regular toilet, but you don't flush it. You just use a heavy duty bag, some kind of absorbent like kitty litter, and then the duct tape is just to hold the bag in place. And you got to make sure that people aren't trying to flush it. But this is a way to make it comfortable to use the toilet, and then it makes it fairly easy to do the cleanup. You can also purchase a portable toilet. The thing that's nice about the purchased one is usually you can put all the stuff you need inside of it and have it in your storage area, so that when you need it, everything's there for using. You can keep all the plastic bags, even the toilet paper inside of it. And I would recommend strongly that you have absorbents. And these absorbents are, I've given you 3 examples. Kitty litter is one. And of course, because it's used for kitties. And it was also recommended in that toilet that first toilet I just showed you. The second one here that I have is the water absorbent polymers. And these polymers are like the kind of, they have taken so much water, like 1,000 times their weight, I think. Don't quote me on that, but they're the things that are found in diapers. And we know that diapers can hold a lot of water because we took our boys to our grandsons to a lake, and they were wearing diapers in the lake. And I'm not kidding, they were having a hard time walking because it was so heavy. So that's another way to use to help contain the litter. And then also hydrated lime. Now, hydrated lime, where I live in Utah, we have real alkaline soil. We would never use hydrated lime in our soil, but it's often sold as a soil additive in places where they have high acidic soil to kind of neutralize the soil. You can also buy it in 50-pound containers in paper bags at most, lots of times at hardware stores. That lime should then be put in some kind of a plastic container so the water doesn't absorb water. Okay, so those are basically the things to do with some beginning things to do with sanitation. Okay, now what about fuel? Fuel is also a real problem in an emergency or some kind of a crisis. And we all have seen, the result of some of the having gasoline problems in our country, the price and things. And so there's even, I've heard lots of, so far they've been rumors, but ideas that we'll have fuel shortages. So, and then the other thing is, so if you're in an area where there's hurricanes and things and there's no power, you can't pump gas because the gasoline pumps need electricity. And I know that there's some places where they've tried to overcome that, but still it's a problem if everyone's lined up getting gas because you don't have gas. So the solution, and you probably all know this, is to, when you get down to half, fill it up. Especially if you're in hurricane country, or if you're where I am and we have really cold winters, keep your gas tank at least half full. Just make it a practice, because you don't want to be stuck in the cold without, in your car without enough gas to keep warm. A couple of things about storing. It's recommended, and I agree, that you probably ought to store enough gasoline to refill your car. That would probably be about 4 or 5 gallon containers. And there's a few tricky things to storing gasoline. You have to, first of all, make sure it's legal where you live, but and have proper containers. It needs to be kept cool and dry, and you should not store it in a dwelling. And I've even seen places say not to store it in your garage. You have to decide that for yourself. It needs fuel additives, or you need to at least store gasoline that's ethanol gasoline, so that it doesn't get so gunky. I'm not exactly sure what happens. I think actually microorganisms grow in the gasoline. So you want to make sure that you're always using that. You can't sit around for 2 or 3 years. It needs to be used within 6 months, and you're constantly reusing it. Okay, the next one that has to do with fuel is considering solar options. There's a lot of talk in the news, of course, about solar energy and all kinds of talk about government subsidies for it, and it might be a good thing to invest in. We've actually had solar panels on our home for about 8 or 9 years, and we actually added a second set of them. We got them before, now we'll have to go back and refit them, because you want to get the kind that you can make them off-grid. At the time, we could not get off-grid, that could go off-grid because they were connected to the power system. But now I think you can do that. So you want to do that if you're thinking about doing solar. Battery storage is really important. We have a cabin that we have solar panels at, and we have battery storage for those. So we're really happy to be able to store the energy that we have, and then we could use it if the power grid's down. Of course, solar energy is weather dependent. I grew up in Oregon, and I'll tell you, I don't know that I would do solar options in Western Oregon because there's not enough sunshine. They also cost a lot. So you have to decide, if you're with your budget. But the one nice thing about waiting is that they continue to make improvements in solar energy. Okay, so just solar is an alternative power source, and you just want to really investigate it if that's something that you think you want to try and do. Now, there's other kinds of solar options. This little sun jack is a nice little, they actually have several versions of it. This one is a 60 watt. So that means it will have some DC capabilities, but it's perfect for charging your devices. And this is very compact, which is nice to have in a backpack. So that's one kind of solar energy to look at. Another one are these, these aren't solar, but these are other kinds of portable power sources. So I told you my daughter lives in Maryland, and I heard someone, I think he was from Kentucky, saying they had below 0 temperatures. She had that same cold storm, I think, go through. And on the street where she lives, there's lots and lots of trees, and the trees went through. There was a lot of wind, and they fell down on the power. And so it was on Christmas Eve when this happened. And the power company wasn't too anxious to get it done, to get it fixed. So she was without power for 3 days. And it was like, I think it was like 13 degrees outside. Her house, when it was 50 degrees, and then it was 45 degrees, and the lowest it finally got was 31 degrees. She kept her water running. She ended up not realizing that her outside source was a problem. And so she ended up with a flooded basement. Such a pain in the neck. And not only that, her Christmas wasn't the best. But I mean, it was just one of those nuisance things, really. But it was one more time she said to me, "Mom, I need to get a generator." And I think maybe now she will. Because a generator can help you with those kinds of frequent power outages. And probably some of you that live in those kinds of areas, if you're in the Southeast, you probably know this about generators. The one on the right is a portable power station that can connect to power that's generated with solar energy. And I've got another slide coming up about that too. That's this one. This is the Goal Zero Yeti 3000. And it's got a generator and a battery cell and solar panels. And it will provide quite a bit of energy for your house. So that's a company that's here in Utah. So I wanted to make a shout out for them. And they also have really high ratings. Now, the ideal way, and if you live in an area where you're losing power frequently, this is probably what you want, is a standby generator. They're not cheap. They do cost a bit. And the way they work is they're wired into your homes. We have one that is wired into our home, and it takes natural gas. So it's always, as long as we have natural gas, it will continue to work. And I think every Thursday morning it kicks on for 10 minutes to kind of, I think that generators have to do that. So if you have a portable one, you have to make sure you're making sure that it's running. This one, ours kicks on automatically. It will not provide electricity for our entire house. We have 2 panels, and one of the panels is we consider the most important, and it will power like the refrigerator and the freezer and our pellet stove. It will power the things that we have to have to maintain to be comfortable. But it won't power our televisions. It won't power our air conditioning. So a standby generator, they probably can. When I was doing the research for this, I saw that I think ours has about 25 kilowatts. They go up into the 80s, and I'm sure that's for big hospitals and businesses and things like that. Okay, next topic, first aid. But before I go on, is there anyone that wants to make a comment about energy or say anything or ask questions or?
I've got a question about water purification.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Arabic stabilized oxygen or Arabic 07? Either of those?
I'm not. Tell me the name of it again.
Arabic stabilized oxygen is one. Apparently, some of the people split off, and there's another one called Arabic 07. That's AEROBIC, Arabic 07.
Yeah. Okay.
My understanding is it's what the California school system uses to for their stored water for the school system. And I was just curious if you knew about it, because it's
Nope.
what I've been using some, and it supposedly will maintain stored water for 5 years, and there's no taste or smell to it.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That's good to know. And I showed you the OPAN that is a small scale one, of course. And I know as I was doing, I can't remember now all the details, but I know that there are places that use oxygen, chemicals that make oxygen to clean their water system. So this sounds kind of similar. Yeah.
Apparently, it over oxygenates the water to where nothing will live in it.
Yeah. That makes sense.
No, I believe it's hydrogen peroxide based. And you know, I think they are effective. The material does tend to degrade over time, as you'd expect with hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the 4th edition, I'll make sure I include that in my other writing. Any other comments or questions? So that's aerobic, AEROBIC 07. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Or Arabic stabilized oxygen.
Okay,
That's 2 different products.
okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Great. Anyone else? Okay, let's go ahead with the first aid, and this is kind of things that are personal, things that you need to make sure you have enough of, and that are ready in case you have an emergency. And every person kind of needs to decide what they think needs to go into a first aid kit. You need to make sure you can take care of broken bones and bleeding, and also, I guess, people who stop breathing. You need to know the skills for. You need to have the skills for that. So that's first aid, and then. Prescription medications. If you can stockpile the prescription medications that you need, I highly recommend that you do. And I'd be curious to know what people do to circumvent the limit on prescriptions. But that's an important thing to make sure you have what you need, especially if they're help you sustain your life. And then over-the-counter medications. Go ahead. Does someone have a comment?
Yeah, I would mention, you know, you can go down to Mexico and buy up, or you know, buy the pharmacist basically writes you a prescription for basically, you know, non-narcotic drugs, but antibiotics and such. But I also found, you know, some sympathetic doctors that,
Sure.
you know, I'm just straight up with them, say, you know, I'm a preparedness nut. I want to store some antibiotics, and they say, what do you want? And they write me some prescriptions. And they've been very supportive of that, and so they'll write me the prescriptions, and I just store the antibiotics.
Okay, thank you. I'm debating whether to say this. I think I will. So as I understand it, every prescription, every pill, has its own unique pill. So it's colored a certain way or it's shaped a certain way. Anyway, as I understand it. So if it's prescribed for animals, it's the same pill that humans would use too, if it's the same thing. So I'm not going to recommend that, but I am going to say that that's an interesting idea. Okay, then the other thing is make sure you have all of the various over-the-counter medications that you use. And then let's talk about personal comfort. We all saw the craziness that happened with the toilet paper scarcity. The public just is not rational at times. And so we have to prepare for that irrationality. And I think probably a lot of you already have enough toilet paper at this point, but that it's not just toilet paper, it's other things as well that people get in their minds that that there's going to be a shortage. So they have to go get it. So you just need to be sure that you have the things that you need. And that's why I have this slide is to stock up on anything that you need. Like my husband uses contact solution. So he needs to make sure he has several bottles of that in reserve. Same thing with your soap and shampoo and all the things that you like to use, toothpaste and so on. Okay, then the last thing I wanted to cover tonight is just a few things about food storage. And I kind of am looking at it, that one method is I call the pantry method. And to me, this is like having an in-home grocery store. And basically all it means is that you're storing what your family eats and that you stock up during sales and you keep track of expiration dates. You need space to do this. And not everyone, I realize, has enough space, but there are some things, you know, that you can find interesting ways to store things. And that way you always have the things that you need. And during that pandemic, people didn't want to go to grocery stores. And if you had your own pantry method, you wouldn't have to go out very often. And there might be other times when you don't want to have to go out. The second is storing long storing food staples. In other words, things that last a long time. And I call this food insurance. And this is grains and beans, sugar, honey, dry milk, oil. These are things that will sustain life, even though you may not eat them in your normal diet all the time. It is good to, however, incorporate them into your diet so that it's not a shock to your system if you all of a sudden eat beans when you haven't been. But even so, it's like having insurance just to make sure that you have enough to sustain you for whatever period of time you think you need it for. And then the third one is dehydrated food. And I want to say right up front, I'm not a fan of this, but I know that there are people who are. The trade-off is the convenience versus taste and quality. I have not been very impressed with dehydrated food. And I also think it's really an expensive way to buy food. When I was writing my book, I was comparing the cost of oatmeal. Sometimes they would have breakfast buckets, they called them, and oatmeal was $4 a serving. And I'm not exaggerating. It was just crazy how this little, and it was a small container. I mean, it was a small package. So I'm not a fan of this, but I think it has its place at times for people who are, that feel that this would be a good solution, and maybe they consider it food insurance also. And then rather than buy these expensive food storage buckets, I recommend that you make your own buckets. Take the things that your family likes and make your own food storage buckets. This was just an example of a breakfast food bucket, things that you might have it. If you haven't heard of Ova Easy egg crystals, they are really nice dehydrated egg. If you're interested in that. Okay. Now that really ends my discussion. And if I know there might be some of you that have things you want to say, I did say that if you're interested in this book, we're giving a special offer. It's just on my website, crisispreparedness.com, and it's 30% off. And there's a code that you put in, just TACDA 30. So TACDA 30% off, and it will be through January 23rd.
Thank you.
And that's me. Goodbye.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Patricia. We appreciate the information. Any last minute questions? There's a lot of good comments on the
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to see the
on the
chat.
chat. The
It was
contingency
exciting.
medical. There are a lot of good things there. I would recommend that everybody go and look at that. Just a reminder, this was recorded, and so you can go to the TACDA website, just tacda.org, and you can watch this presentation again. It is recorded there, so please feel free to do that. Other than that, we do appreciate the attendance that we have, and we encourage you to let others know about TACDA and the resources here, and about the Crisis Preparedness Handbook and the material available on the Crisis Preparedness website. With that, we'll tell everybody good night, unless there's any other late comments.
I have a comment. I just wanted to
Yes.
mention that I actually read all of the weekly crisis preparedness challenge articles, and they are absolutely wonderful. So I would highly recommend it. Even if people have already read this great book, the articles themselves are really, really helpful too.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the comment. Anything else? If not, we'll let Patricia go. We do certainly appreciate your attendance, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.